Good morning to all the leaders, members, and guests of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. I'm addressing you this year under very different circumstances, so I'm here at a different place than our usual venue. It's a place that tells the story of our city, what we've been going through this year, and how we've responded, and how we must move forward together. This is the Guild in Dorchester. It's a refuge created by Black and brown Bostonians where neighbors come together to heal, reclaim, and revitalize their community. When COVID hit, the Guild jumped into action. They transformed this sanctuary into a relief hub, providing food, supplies, comfort, and care to the families and seniors in their community. But the need was overwhelming, and their staff and volunteers themselves at high risk from COVID. It was the same story at so many of our nonprofits. At the same time, members of Boston's business community were reaching out to me every day asking, what can I do to help? That's why, in March, we created the Boston Resiliency Fund to connect these powerful forces of compassion in our city and put them to work saving lives. Boston responded in a big way. We blew past our fundraising goals, and in a matter of days, we were getting food, healthcare, diapers, and formula into the homes of our residents through trusted community providers. With the Resiliency Fund backing, the Guild expanded its reach from a few hundred neighbors to a total of now over 30,000 residents, including seniors, families in quarantine, and immigrant households in neighborhoods all across the city. One young woman discovered a passion for volunteering at the Guild and connecting her with elderly neighbors. She said, "It's so much more than just distributing supplies, it's uplifting our community." In tough times, Bostonians work together. No one should get left behind. That's what the Guild works for here. And that's what we worked for in every neighborhood of our city, so Boston could stay home and flatten the curve. To date, the Resiliency Fund has raised over $33 million from 6,700 individual, people, companies, and foundations. We have distributed over $26 million to 348 organizations that are feeding, clothing, and caring for the vulnerable of our city. 55% of those organizations are led by persons of color, 58% are led by women, and 27% are immigrant-serving organizations. That's who our city is. I want to thank everyone who donated to the Resiliency Fund for your generosity and for the many businesses who reached out in our time of need. And I want to thank the volunteers and workers who deliver these services to their neighbors and to continue to do so every single day. We proved in Boston there's absolutely nothing we can't do when we come together. Early on in the crisis, I made decisions sooner than some were comfortable with to close school buildings, cancel events, and pause construction. I know why there was hesitancy. What the scientists were telling us was frightening. But we had to listen to that science and we had to take action. Lives were at stake. And I knew our city would rise to the occasion. Here's what we did. We brought in the McChrystal Group to help us reorganize the operations of the city government around the daily crisis response. We created a daily text message alert system that gets critical information to nearly 100,000 residents in 11 different languages. We brought COVID testing to 18 community health centers, making sure that every single resident has access to no-cost testing from a trusted provider in their own neighborhood. We built Boston Hope Medical Center at the Convention Center in 5 days, providing care for 750 COVID patients and protecting our hospital capacity. We created a Health and Equities Task Force and an Immigrant Collaborative to target resources to the vulnerable communities that are hardest hit by COVID. We put together a citywide food access system that has distributed over 3.5 million free meals to families and seniors in need. We funded 1,000 childcare seats for essential workers. In addition to gearing up our first responders, we've sent 700,000 units of PPE to outside partners, including nursing homes, community health centers, domestic violence shelters, and homeless providers. We bought 40,000 laptops for our students learning at home. We got 850 permanent rental vouchers into the hands of families with the students in the Boston Public Schools who are at the risk from homelessness. We doubled our shelter capacity and placed 250 formerly homeless individuals into permanent housing. And we created a renter relief fund that got $3 million to nearly 900 households who couldn't otherwise pay their rent. We created a small business fund and have gotten $9 million to over 2,500 businesses More than half of them are owned by people of color. We've approved over 550 restaurants all across the city for outdoor dining, both in public and private spaces. And in COVID-related city contracting, 33% of our spending has gone to certified women and minority-owned businesses. To get all this done, we worked more collaboratively than ever before. 7 straight months of crisis response has made city government more integrated, more nimble, more responsive. And we're going to stay that way. We have broken down silos, and we're working with anyone who can help our city move forward. Health centers and nonprofits, businesses and community groups, colleges and universities. And we're going to keep working together every single day to get our city through this pandemic and meet all the challenges that lie ahead. Let me give you an update on where we stand. As of September 25th, Boston has recorded 16,924 cases of COVID-19. 13,852 of those patients have made confirmed recoveries. 762 Bostonians have lost their lives, and let's not forget them. As of now, roughly 1,800 Bostonians are being tested for COVID every day, and our current positive rate is 2.7%. All but 4 neighborhoods are under 4% positivity, with East Boston around 6%, Dorchester around 5%, and Hyde Park and Rosendale around 4%. Black Bostonians represent 32% of all our total cases, while making up 22% of our population. And Latinx Bostonians are 31% of our cases, compared to 20% of our population. These and other data are the metrics we monitor every single day. What they tell us now is that we have come a very long way since the peak of our surge in late April. But they also tell us that the virus is still very much with us. And the inequalities affecting communities of color and immigrant communities continue to define the impacts of this pandemic, the health impacts, and the economic impacts as well. Limiting the spread and preventing another surge depends on the actions that we all take. To avoid transmitting the virus, to work together as a city in our response, and to bring resources and supports to those who are most severely impacted. We are still in the thick of this fight. COVID is still very much with us. Economic recovery will be a long, hard road. Racial injustice must be addressed, and equity must be our shared goal. These are no small tasks. Based on our response so far, we have proven we can do hard things. And my priorities remain clear. I am dedicated to keeping the residents of our city safe throughout this pandemic, supporting them through whatever hardships they face, addressing the inequities that hold us back, and rebuilding our economy in a way that works for everyone. And I'm committed to pushing forward a plan for the future. Because just as we are meeting the needs of the pandemic, we must adapt to meet the economic, social, and global challenges of tomorrow. Today, I'm going to talk about how we're advancing these priorities in city government and what we must all do to stay safe, recover, and rebuild our city. I'll start with our city finances. Every organization has faced tough realities this year. Whether you're a local business or a large corporation, a neighborhood nonprofit, or a world's famous hospital, you have to tighten your belt and make tough decisions. City government is no exception. This year, we put in place a hiring freeze on non-essential positions, and we cut $65 million from the budget for fiscal year 2021. Despite this loss in revenue, we made sure to protect our record new investments in education, in affordable housing, and in public health, because these are the fundamental needs are more important now than ever. And we protected city workers. We have more than 18,000 City of Boston employees, and not one has missed a paycheck. They've been able to continue spending and supporting grocery stores, restaurants, and small businesses all across our city. We also maintained our capital investments so that we can continue to strengthen our city, and Boston remains a place where people want to raise their families and come to work. In the midst of a trying time, residents in every neighborhood will continue to see improvements in safety, opportunity, and quality of life in their communities. For example, last week we topped off Engine 42 in Roxbury, the first new firehouse in Boston in over 3 decades. On Saturday, we started work on our newest bus lanes, the outbound route down Washington Street in Rosendale. And next month, we will open the $17 million, 27,000 square foot renovation of the Roxbury branch of the Boston Public Library in Nubian Square. It's the largest neighborhood branch in the system, and it's a transformative library that Roxbury deserves, with public art, learning spaces, and 21st century resources. It will host an African American collection and a Center for Economic Justice dedicated to Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King's legacy in our city. We've been laying the groundwork to withstand a crisis like this for years. Through responsible budgeting, we earned a perfect AAA bond rating for a record 7 years in a row. That put us in a position to weather this storm while continuing to support our city and invest in our neighborhoods. An analysis reported in the New York Times last month found that Boston is the city government best prepared fiscally for the current economic crisis. We will continue to make whatever adjustments to our budgets are needed, because protecting the city's financial health is how we maintain a well-functioning government that can be there for people in both good times and in hard times. On so many issues, the priorities, the planning, and the investments we made before COVID have put us in a stronger position to respond, recover, and rebuild. In housing, on top of the 1,000 new rental vouchers for BPS families, we are creating the first city-funded voucher program in Boston's history. And we continue our 2-year legislative push for a right to legal counsel for tenants in eviction proceedings. That's more crucial than ever, as the state and the federal eviction moratorium expires. In transportation, the plans we made to expand bus lanes and bike lanes are exactly what we needed to help frontline workers to get to and from their jobs safely. Now we're making them permanent. On the environment, the pandemic has shown us why our commitment to following science, investing in resilience, and advancing environmental justice is so important. I've expanded investment in parks all across the city, and I've kept the pledge I made at the Chamber 2 years ago to invest 10% of our capital budget in waterfront parks that protect our homes and businesses. Because we created the nation's first municipal office of recovery services, we've been able to help those who need help the most with addiction throughout this pandemic, as we fight in court for our long-term regional recovery campus on Long Island. And in education, the 3-year, $100 million investment that I announced at the beginning of this year is targeted directly at equity and opportunity gaps that impact students with the deepest needs. And now it's helping us support our students most in need during this pandemic. Last week, the Boston Public Schools opened remotely for the first time in history. To be ready, we accelerated our plans to make Boston a district that provides a computer for every single student. As we do this work, we're preparing for the education model that emerges when we move past this pandemic. To close the digital divide, over the long term, we're going to need all hands on deck. We're going to need every single level of government, along with the private sector, to step up in a big way to find and fund solutions. It's not just an achievement gap in our schools, it's a skills gap in our future workforce. And it's the concept of equity clearly defined. A child without a computer or internet at home needs a different level of engagement and investment than a child in a well-resourced home, especially when you consider how likely it is that the same child also experiences systemic racism through housing insecurities, health inequities, and a host of other challenges. We have to address these issues together. That's why we are committed to rebuilding an economy that works for everyone. We are working with leaders and experts in every industry, providing safety guidelines and protective equipment, listening to their needs and concerns, and identifying opportunities to help, especially the hardest hit. To help the tourism sector rebuild, we have launched a plan for marketing campaign to invite and welcome regional visitors to our city in a safe and healthy way. We are making sure Boston is open for business and investments is coming to our city. In the last 2 months, we have approved 776,000 square feet of development, 421 units of housing, 30% of which are income-restricted affordable homes. That's not counting Suffolk Downs, the largest private investment in affordable housing and resilient infrastructure in Boston's history. As we welcome major investments, we're also in the trenches, helping our small businesses. They are the backbone of our neighborhood economies and local communities, and they have taken a huge hit due to COVID. So while we've taken the steps necessary to protect our residents, we've also worked harder than ever before to understand and respond to the needs of our small businesses. For restaurants like El Barrio Cafe in Dorchester, these measures have been lifesavers. Owner Joandre Vasquez said he could not have reopened without the grant funding and outdoor dining supports from the city. That's also why I'm here at the Guild today. This is a place where Black and brown Bostonians come together to share ideas and grow new businesses. At a time when we're planning our economic recovery, we must continue to foster creativity, encourage innovation, and remove barriers for communities of color to build wealth. Racial equity is not a new conversation. In 2016, I devoted my chamber address to calling out our city to dismantle and end systemic racism. Here's what I said. Racial inequities are evident in health, education, and almost every aspect of community and individual well-being. These disparities are not only rooted in history, they continue to be presenting barriers to opportunity today. That means it's not enough to have colorblind policies. It's not enough to have good intentions. Personal virtues don't add up to systemic change. It was the first time in Boston's history that a mayor put ending systemic racism at the top of our city's agenda. And we have advanced this priority in every aspect of city policy, in our school investments, in our housing policies, in our neighborhood investments, in transportation access. It's our economic vision, and that's our public health mission. The COVID crisis is a good example. It's a lesson in systemic inequality, and has taken intentional work every day to address it. That's also a lesson on how we are leading in Boston, by tackling inequities head-on and unlocking the immense talent in the Black community and communities of color to build, create, and succeed. But when George Floyd was murdered in late May of this year, it was clear we are nowhere near ending systemic racism and achieving justice in our country. The conversation in the 70s, 80s, or 90s didn't get us there. The conversations after Ferguson didn't get us there. The conversations we had with the Chamber in 2016 didn't get us there. This time must be different. In the coming days, I will receive the final recommendations of our Police Reform Task Force. We will break new ground in accountability, diversity, and transparency. But ending systemic racism goes so much further than police policies. As I said in 2016, it affects every aspect of our society and every kind of opportunity. That's what systemic means. And that's why we've reorganized city government, putting a chief of equity in my cabinet to drive this work forward and make sure everything we do is laser focused on ending systemic racism and achieving our racial equity in our city. I don't want to be back here in this chamber meeting 3 years from now, having this same conversation again. We must do more, all of us, the City of Boston, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, all of our 351 cities and towns, and every leader in the private sector. We also need leadership at the head of our federal government. Boston and every city and state needs a steady partner in Washington and a White House committed to the health and well-being of all Americans. Unfortunately, we don't have that, and our country has paid the price. But in the meantime, Boston will lead on COVID, on economic recovery, on racial justice, on climate action. These are tough fights, and we face a long road ahead. We need to keep making health and safety our priority every day. We need to work together to rebuild our economy so it works for everyone. And we need to guarantee justice for everyone who calls our city and our country home. At this moment of uncertainty, we must continue to move Boston forward. As mayor, I'm focused on our safety, our recovery, and our path ahead. And while our city battles a pandemic, I've drawn on strengths, the resilience, and the selflessness I've seen and felt all across the city. If you are on this call or watching this speech, I want to thank you. I want to thank the businesses and nonprofit leaders who reached out to help us. I want to thank the nurses and doctors and medical staff who worked around the clock to save lives. I want to thank the police, fire, and EMS first responders who never stopped being there for us, no matter the risk. I want to thank the grocery store workers, the restaurant workers, and delivery drivers who kept us fed. I want to thank all of our public employees who've kept our city government going without missing a beat. I want to thank everyone who works from home and continues to work from home. I want to thank the parents and guardians who are helping children learn at home while trying to do their own jobs and manage their finances. I want to thank the small business owners who have worked so hard. I want to thank every single person who puts on a mask when they leave the house. Boston has been knocked down before, but we've always gotten back up. And when we rise up, we reach back and lift all those who have been held down in the past. This year, and these challenges are no different. We are determined to keep the people of our city safe. We are determined to come out of this crisis a more resilient and a more equitable city than we entered it. We are Boston, and there is nothing we can't do when we work together. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the city of Boston.